Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a topic that's really intriguing, I think. The power of crowds.
Yeah.
The idea of this thing called the general will,
Yeah.
and how it all connects back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yeah. Always seems to circle back to Rousseau.
Right. You've given us some excerpts from Gustave Le Bon's Crowd Psychology,
Okay.
and also Rousseau's own The Social Contract.
Hmm.
So we've got a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, it is fascinating to see how these two thinkers, despite writing in totally different eras,
Right.
really offer perspectives on this idea of how
Yeah.
individuals are transformed within a crowd.
Yeah.
And then, how leaders can exploit this.
Yeah.
Sometimes for good, sometimes not so much.
Yeah. Well, Le Bon, he didn't mince words.
Right.
Writing in the late 19th century, he kind of saw crowds as essentially childlike,
Mm-hmm.
prone to tantrums, easily manipulated.
Right.
He argued that they have a collective mind
Yeah.
that's distinct from the individuals within it.
Interesting. You have to, I think, consider the context, though, right?
Sure.
Le Bon was writing at a time of major social and political upheaval in Europe,
Of course.
the rise of mass movements, and the increasing power of the press.
Right.
Were creating anxieties among intellectuals about, well, the unpredictable nature of crowds.
Yeah, it was a different time. He uses some interesting examples
Right.
to try to make his point.
Yeah.
He compares how the French, for instance,
Okay.
reacted to a perceived insult to their ambassador
Mm.
with how the British reacted to a military setback.
Okay. Interesting.
And the French, he says, they just flew off the handle
Oh, wow.
while the British stayed calm.
Mm.
And it
Not very different.
it highlights how cultural differences
Hmm.
can actually shape crowd behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, what's key here, though, is that Le Bon believed that crowds are primarily driven by,
Uh-huh.
unconscious forces, right?
Yeah.
Making them very potent for destruction,
Mm.
but not really creation. He believed that civilizations are built by intellectual elites, not by the masses.
That's a pretty provocative idea.
It is,
Right.
yeah.
And it leads right into his argument about
Yeah.
how cunning orators can exploit this fleeting nature of crowd influence
Mm.
by appealing to, base instincts.
Yeah, yeah. He contrasts these manipulators with leaders like Peter the Hermit or Martin Luther, who genuinely believed in their cause.
Right.
So he draws a line between manipulation and true belief.
So there's a distinction there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that distinction hinges on this idea of contagion,
Okay.
right? Le Bon believed that emotions and actions, they're contagious within a crowd.
Hmm.
Picture yourself, just imagine you're in
Yeah.
a huge crowd and everyone's reacting with fear or anger.
Right.
It's almost impossible to not get swept up in that same
Yeah.
emotion, even if you don't even understand what's happening.
Right. Now, if Le Bon saw crowds as driven by this unconscious contagion,
Right.
Rousseau presents a very different kind of collective entity,
Okay.
one that's based on, conscious agreement.
Right.
He calls this the general will. But oh boy, it's a notoriously difficult concept to actually grasp.
Oh, it is. It is.
I think even Rousseau seems to struggle with defining it sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, imagine a sports team, right?
Okay.
The general will, it's not just the sum of individual players' desires.
Right.
It's that intangible team spirit
Mm.
that propels them toward victory.
I like that.
And it arises from the social contract, right? This agreement that individuals make to actually form a society.
Right.
This contract, according to Rousseau,
Yeah.
creates a new entity, almost a moral and collective body
Hmm.
that has its own will, separate from the individual wills of its members.
So it's not just about everyone getting what they want individually.
No, it's not about that at all. It's about something greater.
It's about something greater, yes.
Emerging, exactly.
From this collective.
And Rousseau believed this general will aims for the common good. But
Sure.
Rousseau's critics, they raise this crucial question.
Right.
Can the general will be misled? Can individual interests clash with the collective good and even distort it?
Those are some serious questions.
They are.
They really get at the heart of how we think about power and democracy and the role of the individual in society. And then there's Rousseau's concept of sovereignty,
Yes.
which add another layer of complexity here. He argues that sovereignty shifts from the individual to the collective body, formed by the social contract.
Yeah.
So the people become sovereign, not the ruler.
Okay.
And he makes this very powerful statement about individual liberty.
Yeah.
He says, to renounce liberty is to renounce being a man.
Powerful statement.
It really underscores the value he places on individual freedom,
Yeah.
even within this collective framework.
Absolutely.
But hold on, I'm getting a bit lost here. If the general will is all about the common good, how does Rousseau explain those times when crowds clearly go off the rails?
Yeah.
How does this idea of individual liberty fit in?
Yeah, that's the paradox, isn't it, at the heart of Rousseau's work. He believed that true freedom could only be achieved within a society where individuals willingly submit to this general will, understanding that it ultimately serves their own best interests as well as the good of the whole.
Right.
But achieving that kind of collective harmony, well, that's no easy feat.
Right.
And that brings us back to Le Bon and his analysis of revolutions.
You mean his idea that revolutions are like a runaway train?
Yeah. He used the French Revolution as a prime example of the power of revolutionary crowds and the psychological factors that can drive them.
Right. But it's more nuanced than that.
It is.
He acknowledged that revolutions often start with these rational motives.
Yeah.
A desire for justice or to overthrow a tyrant.
Sure, of course.
But then things get messy.
They do. He argued they quickly become dominated by irrational forces like fear, hatred, and a thirst for revenge.
So it's that contagious energy again. The way emotions can escalate.
Yes.
And spiral out of control within a crowd.
Exactly.
Almost like a mob mentality.
Exactly. A mob mentality.
And this idea that revolutions were inevitable.
Right.
This revolutionary fatality.
Yeah, that was popular at the time.
But Le Bon wasn't buying it.
No, he wasn't buying it at all. He believed that individuals, especially strong leaders, could sometimes step in and avert disaster, even in the face of widespread unrest.
So he's saying revolutions aren't like clockwork, destined to happen no matter what.
Right. Not destined.
But didn't the French Revolution pretty much prove him wrong? It seems like a classic example of those irrational forces taking over and leading to horrific consequences.
Well, Le Bon pointed to specific factors that he felt contributed to the chaos.
Okay.
Things like the rigidity of the French social caste system, the king's inability to adapt to changing times, and the growing influence of revolutionary ideas spread by, philosophers and writers.
He was basically saying the system was a powder keg just waiting to explode.
Exactly.
I'm curious, were there any specific events that he saw as turning points?
Absolutely.
Moments where things could have gone differently?
He points to the king's flight to Varennes in 1791 as a critical moment.
Okay.
The king tried to escape France with his family, but he was caught and brought back to Paris.
Yeah.
And this seemingly minor event, Le Bon argues, caused a huge shift in public opinion. The king, once a symbol of authority, became a target of hatred and distrust.
It's like overnight, the king went from being this revered figure to a traitor in the eyes of the people.
Exactly.
And all because he tried to flee.
And that shift in perception, Le Bon says, opened the door to the reign of terror.
Oh, wow.
He emphasizes how the very people who led the revolution, men like Robespierre, they became consumed by fear and paranoia, resorting to extreme measures to protect the revolution. It's a chilling reminder of how mob mentality can distort even the most well-intentioned people.
So this whole idea of the general will, is it just a philosopher's fantasy? Rousseau gives us this inspiring vision of a society working together for the common good.
Right.
But then Le Bon throws a bucket of cold water on that with this dark view of crowd psychology.
Maybe it's not an either situation. Maybe it's about finding that balance. Recognizing the potential for collective action while also staying vigilant against those who would exploit our emotions for their own gain.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
But I'm still wrestling with this.
Yeah.
If Rousseau gives us this inspiring vision of the general will, how do we reconcile that with Le Bon's warnings about the dark side of crowd psychology? If crowds are so easily swayed by emotions, so prone to irrationality, how can we possibly trust them to act in the best interests of the whole?
Perhaps that's where the enduring relevance of both thinkers lies. Rousseau gives us an ideal to strive for, a society where individual freedom is balanced with a collective commitment to the common good. And Le Bon warns us of the potential pitfalls, the dangers of manipulation, and the seductive power of irrationality. It's, like we said, a roadmap with caution signs. Rousseau shows us the destination, and Le Bon points out the hazards along the way.
It's like a roadmap with caution signs. Rousseau shows us the destination, and Le Bon points out the hazards along the way.
There are.
But that makes me think, is this whole general will thing just wishful thinking? I mean, are we giving Rousseau too much credit here?
I think it's more about understanding the potential and the pitfalls. Remember, Rousseau was writing during the Enlightenment,
Right.
a time of immense optimism about human reason and progress.
Yeah.
But Le Bon came later after witnessing the horrors of the French Revolution and the rise of nationalism in Europe.
So Le Bon was more of a realist or maybe even a bit of a pessimist. He saw firsthand how quickly things could go wrong when crowds got carried away. And he was really worried about the influence of, powerful speakers who could manipulate people's emotions.
Exactly. And this idea of contagion. Think about how that plays out on social media today. One viral post can trigger this wave of outrage, even if the information is totally false.
It's like Le Bon predicted the age of social media and fake news.
Right.
He'd probably be saying, I told you so.
Yeah.
But that raises an important question for me. If we're constantly bombarded with information, how do we know what to believe? How can we avoid getting swept up in the emotional tide?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Right.
We need to be able to step back and evaluate the information we're consuming and consider different perspectives. It's not always easy, especially when we're dealing with really complex issues.
So it's not just about being skeptical of everything we see online. It's about being more thoughtful, more discerning. And maybe that's the key takeaway from all of this, understanding how our own minds work, how we're influenced by others, and how to make sure we're not just blindly following the crowd.
It's about taking responsibility for our own beliefs and actions,
Right.
even when we're surrounded by a sea of opinions.
That's a great point. It's so easy to get caught up in the moment, to react emotionally without really thinking things through. And I think that's what both Rousseau and Le Bon were trying to get at, each in their own way.
Absolutely. They both offer valuable insights into the human condition, the complexities of individual and collective behavior, and that ongoing struggle between reason and emotion.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. And for you listening, I hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and maybe even a healthy dose of skepticism. The next time you see a trending hashtag or a viral video, remember Le Bon's warnings about the power of crowds. Ask yourself, am I being manipulated here? Am I thinking critically, or am I getting swept up in the emotional tide?
And remember Rousseau's vision of the general will. It might seem idealistic, but it reminds us that we have the potential to achieve great things when we work together for the common good.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of crowds, the general will, and the enduring relevance of Rousseau and Le Bon. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and stay curious.